Hello there, it's Jan back from JB Crafts. Thank you for joining me on the channel today, and I'm back with a little bit of inky goodness today. We've not done an inky background for a while, so just as an alternative to using up your design papers, you can make your own backgrounds, and I love doing this. This is one of the things that I spend my time doing. If I've not got a certain project in mind, I often just sit and have a play with the inks and the backgrounds. You all know how much I love my inks, especially the distress range, but you could equally do this design with pattern paper. If ink's not your bag and you don't like all the fuss and the mess, you could, when I show you the template for this, you could easily cut these panels out of some pattern paper. Would be much quicker. You get very much the same kind of finish, and embellishment wise you can pop absolutely anything on there. I didn't want to distract too much from the background, so I've gone fairly simple with my embellishments and sentiment today. And it is, if I remember rightly, it's a 6x6 inch card, and I'm going to show you how I worked out how to get all these and get the spacing pretty well on the front there. And then I've gone very, very simple on the inside. I didn't want to go over the board today, so it says smile every day, and inside it says you brighten up my day. I've just gone round the edge with a little bit of the pale blue ink that I used on the front, just to link it together, and that was it. So nice 6x6 square design, and this one I did with my distress inks. And I used tumbled glass, which is a really nice pale sort of turquoisey blue, and then the shaded lilac for that beautiful sort of purpley lilac colour. And then I've done a little bit of overstamping where I've introduced the some of the oxide inks as well, just because you get a more opaque finish, and I'll talk you through that when we do. We're going to make the background together, and then I've already got one done that's cut into its segments, because it did take a little while to cut all these and mat them and then get them onto the front panel. So I wanted to show you how I made the background with the inks and the stamps. I've just chosen random stamps out of my stash. They're not particular collections or anything like that. It was just what I wanted on the front of the card. Done a little bit of stenciling as well, which I think my stencil is knocking about somewhere. Not sure where I put that, to be honest. It will be around. I need to find that. I've not got that ready. I know I saw it the other day. It'll be one of the many piles and stashes that I've got knocking around here. We'll have a look for that in due course. It's eluding me at the minute. It'll not be far away. I don't think I put it away, so I'll have to double check that shortly. I know I saw it the other day. As to where I saw it, that is a very different question. Right, let me just pause the video and find that, otherwise it's going to bug me. I'll be back in 1 second. Right, I've sorted that out now, found it. Okie doke, so we can get cracking. You probably didn't even miss me. I just paused it for a second. It was going to bug me as to where I'd put it, and I needed it for later on. You can just see the little dots on here are being stenciled, and I'll show you the product that I've used that from. So yeah, let's get started. We'll pop this one to one side, and first of all we're going to make that background. So we're going to use some more inks, but I'm going to swap out the turquoisey one today for the tumbled glass for salvage patina. Now I have got the oxide because I don't have, surprisingly, I don't have a full range of the distress inks. I have the majority of the original range, but when they brought out the new colours, I didn't buy the inks because more often than not I use the oxides. So I do have a whole collection of the distress oxides, the whole colour palette. Very, very fortunate that I was able to get all those. But yeah, that's why I've gone for the oxide. Otherwise I would have used the ink for the background and the oxide to do the overstamping. The inks are a dye base, so they're much more translucent, whereas the oxides have pigment ink in, so they have much more sort of depth of colour for overstamping, which is why I've done a mixture of the two. So I'm going to prop the tumbled glass to one side and bring these two in. I'm also going to grab my little craft mat there, just because we're going to be making a bit of a mess, and I want some water, which looks as if it's about ready for filling up. This is just tap water in my spritzer, and I need to make sure I've got my cloth at the handy. And we will also grab a wet wipe as well, just to be on the safe side, because it is an inky one. It is a little bit messy. If you prefer to do this wearing gloves, you can, but you know me, I'm not happy if I'm not covered in ink. So we've got everything we need there. And then we need a piece of cardstock. So this is just smooth white cardstock that I'm working on. You can use watercolour card, but I find that the texture on the watercolour card can affect the stamping. You can still stamp on it, but it doesn't give quite as crisp a finish because there is a slight texture. So I've gone for some smooth stamping card, and this measures 5 1/8 tall by 4 7/8 wide, and there is a reason for that. So what I'm going to do is bring in this bit, which was my workings out, and this is how I started. I knew what I wanted to do for this, and I have altered the layout slightly for the card. I've got the single squares in the center here. I had them down the right hand side, but it hasn't altered the measurements. So I've got the short one and the long one on the left hand side, and then I've got the long one and the short one on the right hand side with the 3 squares down the center there. So the first thing I did was actually draw my 6 by 6 inch square. Okay, so on this is just a piece of copy of paper that I was using as scrap, and the first thing I did was do my 6 by 6 inch square. Then I decided I wanted a matte layer on it, and even though I've kept it white because I wanted this to be the focal point, but I did want to raise it onto a matte layer, and I've just gone down 1/4 inch, and that's what my pencil line was here, for 5 3/4 inches. So that's going to be the layer on top of it that we're going to work on. And then what I did was work out what measurements I'd got left. So using my ruler, I measured this, and we've got that 5 3/4 inches, and I knew I wanted 1/8 inch all the way around the outside. So then I came in for this cut line here, and then it just worked out that if I left the 1/8 inch gap in the middle columns, my panels worked out at, let me just change that for the other ruler, you can see that one better. My panels worked out at 1 3/4 inches here. So all these panels were cut then. Once we've got this in place, we're going to cut it vertically into panels that are 1 3/4 inches wide. Okay, and then as far as splitting it was concerned, it was just a case of working out what this measurement would be, which is the 5 1/2, and then taking that 1/8 inch out. Okay, so I've literally measured the 2 3/8 and added the 3 inches on, which has given me 5 3/8. Okay, so lots of different ways of doing this. It was sort of like, it came about that I wanted to sort of map these. So that's what the second measurements are. So I actually worked out what these spaces would be, and that's what I've actually cut my silver matte layer from. And it is just a matte silver satin card there, and those first measurements are the silver layer. And then literally I've just come down 1/8 inch, and I've cut this to that 1/8 inch smaller. So for example, this one is 1 5/8 by 2 1/4. The bottom one is 1 5/8 by 2 7/8. So when I added up these measurements, this is where I got the 5 1/8 by 4 7/8, which is the piece that we're actually going to work on. I know that sounds a little bit complicated, but if you want to do this design and you're not great with measurements, just follow this. You can take a screenshot of the template there to save, and just work with these measurements. It did take me a little while to work it out, but this is what I like to do. I like to design these. So I've got my piece of card that measures 5 1/8 tall, which is this measurement plus this measurement, and then I've got it 4 7/8 wide, which are the 3 lots of 1 5/8, which are going to be my columns for the top layer. Okay, so let's put that to one side, and we can go ahead with the inking now. We're going to do the background. So I'm going to work on the front of here, and I'm going to start off with, I normally start off with the lighter colour, but because this is oxide, this time I'm going to start off with the ink. All right, because the oxide will layer over the top. So we're going to do that, popping it on the mat here, spritzing it and picking it up onto the card. I'm also going to need I've got my little heat tool handy down here. We'll get that ready as well. I'm going to spritz this with some water. not worried about mixing it up today. I just want to pick some up on here, and I'm not really worried where it goes, and I love this kind of speckling. All right, so I'm just going to aim for about 3 different parts of it, like so. And once you're happy with that, get the heat tool on and dry that ink. If you don't dry, it doesn't layer as well. It can start and become muddy depending on what colour families you've used. So just by giving it a dry, it ensures that we can layer over the top of it now. We're going to introduce that second colour. And I love how we've got some of those little spotty bits in there. All right, so it's not bone dry. I just want to get rid of any excess moisture on it. And then what I'm going to try and do is use the other side of this, rather, because we're going to go back to the lilac when we've done this layer. So I'm going to put the salvage patina down here. And I'm going to do the same. Going to give it a spritz, and you can see the difference in it straight away. You can see that this is still like, you know, sort of solid colour dye, whereas this one's gone all sort of chalky and pastel. And normally I love the oxides for that reason, but I just wanted that mixture. So I'm going to go in here where I've got gaps, and I'm going to pick up that salvage patina into the gaps. And then when I'm happy with it, I'm just going to give that a blast to stop it running too far into that lilac. Now don't worry if you do get some of the harsh edges. We've got quite a, you know, a square edge here, but we're going to do some overstamping, so it will alter the look of it. So again, I want some of this down in that bottom corner there. Don't be afraid to sort of give it a little bit of a helping hand with the water if you wish. If you want, you know, that good coverage on there. And then again, once I'm happy with that area, I'm going to dry it to stop that ink moving. And I am literally just taking the moisture out of it. It doesn't have to be bone dry. It's just a case of taking some of the moisture out of it. And then I want to get into that middle area now. So I'm going to pop it right down in the centre there. Give it a good smoosh about. And again, don't be afraid to add a bit more water in if you wish. Okay, and then I also want a little bit up in this top section here. Brilliant. Okay, so happy with that for the first layer. So we're going to get that drying going again. And then I'm going to go in a second time. I want a little bit more depth of colour. Not so much on the lilac. I do want a bit here for the lilac. And I'll show you how you can address those areas where you want to be a bit more specific. So yeah, just get that dried off, and that's why I've left the lilac down here. And you can see now what I mean, hopefully, about, you know, we've got that gorgeous intensity of colour here on the salvage patina, where that oxide has laid over the top of the ink. You can see here where it's much more intense. That bit's still a little bit damp there. And I don't want the purple to overtake. I want a nice blend of the two colours as pastels, but I do want some more in here. So what I'm going to do is just add a tiny bit more of the purple there, and just liven that up with a bit of water. And then I'm going to pop this bit where I know that gap is sort of here in the middle. And then if you do have any areas where you want to add that little bit more colour, if you want to wear gloves for this, you can. But I tend to just pick some up with my finger here and just pop it into the areas that I want it to go, like so. Okay, does stain a little bit, but like I said, I'm not happy when I'm not covered in ink. So each time I'm drying that section that I've done, just so that we don't get those colours merging. If you're working with two colours that make, so for example, two primary colours that make a secondary colour, that you get a third shade in there, and that can work quite well. Okay, and then I think I'm just going to try and get that central bit again. We'll just pop, wake that ink up that's left on there, and you'll get some more interesting sort of elements on here when you go back in that ink again, just picking up some of those dots and it's knowing when to stop, and I think that's probably enough for what I need. So I'm going to make sure this is actually dry now, because we're going to do some stamping over the top. And like I say, we can address this area here where it's got that hard line. But to be honest, when it's chopped up into its little pieces, you don't notice it as much, because it just becomes part of the design. So I've lifted mine off the desk. I know I've got all the ink underneath it, but when that heat can escape from underneath, it does reduce the amount your card warps. Now it will always, you can see here I've got a bit of curving on there, but all I do is just manipulate it from underneath back into its shape, and we've got a nice piece to work on with the stamps. Okay, so we are actually going to clean this up now, and I am literally just, for the sake of the video, I am going to mop it up. Sometimes I'll get some scrap and mop it up with the scrap card, but today it's just going away like so. So we don't need that one for a second. I'll put that one down here. We've got our background at the ready, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring in some of my stamps and do some over stamping now. So because I'm stamping with a stamp block, I'm not going to use my stamping platform for this, but I am going to turn it over because it's got a really nice soft spongy area on the back, and I'm going to do some stamping on here. And I'm going to grab a piece of scrap paper, because I am going to over stamp on elements of it. So just to protect the back of my Misty, I am just going to pop that piece of scrap paper underneath. Okay, so if you're not happy with how it's laying, just, as I say, manipulate it back into shape and we're good to go. So I like it this way up. All right, have a look at which way round. It doesn't look right to me that way. Could get away with that way, but I think I actually prefer it this way. So I'm going to have this as the top, and it's important to remember when you make that decision that you want that 5 1/8 piece to be the vertical length. This is why I popped the T here, just to remind me that I wanted this at the top. All right, and the reason I did that is because the first time I had a play with this, I actually cut it up this way, and I had a headache trying to work out why the pieces didn't work out, and it's slightly shorter, so the measurements were just completely askew. So yeah, you need to make sure that that 5 1/8 is the height of your card, and the 4 7/8 is the width. Okay, so I'm going to pop it down. I've got several different stamps, and I'm now going to bring in a couple of other inks. I've got the lilac, the shaded lilac in the oxide, which will show up better over the ink. And I'm also going to bring in a neutral shade, and because these are both cool colours, I've gone for a grey. So I've got Hickory Smoke. So we're going to do some stamping with these two colours. So I'm going to move the original ones out of the way. We're going to start off with the grey as a neutral. And I'm just going to bring in some stamps out of my stash. Now this one is just a script stamp that's got a couple of little postmarks in. All right, so what I want to do is I'm going to use this without a block. I just want some random stamping. So I tend to pop it on the desk here and ink it up. I find it easier to do that. And I'm just doing that top section because I don't need the whole stamp. And then all I'm going to do is position this. I want some across the top here, so making sure that it's reasonably straight, because it is script. It's not particularly legible, but I don't want the script to be wonky on the design. And you can see how that grey goes over the top. And again, I'm being relatively random with this. I don't particularly want to think too hard about it, so I'm going to come down to the bottom and do a bit over the bottom here, like so. And this is why I just pop the paper down, to catch that excess ink. And then I'm also going to come down this side here. So I tend to work in threes. So I want 3 areas that are going to have a little bit of text on, like so. And that's going to be that one. And that's why I just grabbed the wet wipe here, so I can just give these a quick wipe off and then pop them over to one side. So the next one that I'm going to bring in is a number stamp. I don't need you just yet. All right, so again, these are just from my stash. This is just a set of random numbers. It's got that sort of, you can see here where there's just elements of it peeking through and it is just background, so it literally is just going to be elements of it popping into the design. So we're going to ink. It helps if you ink the right side of the stamp, Jan. Let's ink the stamp instead of the actual acrylic block. It works much better. Okay, and I want to pop this in certain places, so I'm going to start with one coming off the side under where I've done the script, and I'm going to bring it quite a way across, and I'm just visualizing what that first column will look like so that it pops into the middle as well, and give that a press. Okay, and then we're going to do the same again. We'll make sure we've got the stamp facing up. Okay, and I'm going to turn it. I'm going to bring this one down the side of that text here. And again, it pays not to think too much about this. I'm just sort of going in sets of 3, and you can't really go wrong with this. You know, you can decide whereabouts you want this to go, and it doesn't really make much difference. I'm going to bring one across the top of that. I'm sort of clustering it near the script so that we've got those grey elements like clustered together. So that's that one done. Pop that one to one side, and then I have got a little postmark stamp, and as I say, I've just been through my sets and had a look what was where, and just grabbed oddments that I wanted to work with. I've got a lot of my stamp sets have got the postmarks on, and then I'm going to flick over to the shaded lilac for this one, and I just want to bring these over the edge in certain places. Just make sure that's the right way up. Yep. So we're going to go here. So I've got the lilac over the lilac, and you can see what I mean about there's much more intensity of colour in the oxide than there is in the dye ink. So that's why I've chosen to stamp over the top with the oxide. We're going to bring one, cluster it in there, I think. And again, just that rule of 3s. Okay, and then I think we'll bring one off this edge here, stamping over the edge, and then it makes it look as if you've taken something from a larger piece of background. If you keep everything regimentally inside it, it does look as if you've framed something. I've also on that same stamp set got a little coffee ring, which I quite like, and I'm going to go back to the grey for that. So I'm just working in those 2 colours to overstamp, and again I'm just going to go for some of the gaps. So where I can see there's a gap, they've definitely got something going on in the middle there, so we'll bring one of those over to the middle, and then I'll take one, I think, off the edge up here. So just those 3 sets again, and then the last one is from the same set as the stencils, and it is an old Crafter's Companion set that was brought out as background stencils and focal stamps. So this has got a nice stencil in it, which we're going to use in a second, and then it's got some dandelion clock stamps in, and I've just used a couple of the little tiny ones, and I want to work out, I want them to go like that. I want one up and one slightly lower like that. So we put them on there, pick them up, and then I'm going to go back to the lilac for this one. So again, just inking up with that oxide, and wherever I can see a gap or a suitable space, we're going to pop these in. So we're going to go into there, I think. And I'm not bothered if the stamps overlap, like this is just connecting that one together. And then I'm going to turn it sideways, I think, and go down at the bottom there. All right, so you can see we've got that going on. So that's my stamping with those. So put those to one side, and then I'm going to bring that ink back in the lilac, and this was my elusive stencil that I was looking for, and I've got my blending brush this time for the ink. And again, I don't want to go over the whole thing covering it in dots. I just want, so I'm looking, there's a gap here, so it would look great to have a few of those little random dots just in the gap here. I've got another gap through the middle here, and I am actually going lilac over the turquoise, but I don't mind that. So again, just random bits. I'm not going to do the whole bit. I've left a gap here, so we've got a bit up here with a gap and then a bit here. And then I want a third element, so I'm going to go through that section just here. So everything's been done in sets of 3, but you can see how that just sort of links it all together. And I think that's just about finished. I'm happy with that. I didn't go through the splatting water on here. You could if you wanted to, but I chose not to because I've still got some white elements in the background. And you can see that that one is actually got more white in it. This one had much more coverage. There's a little bit of white here, little bit here, but not an awful lot. Little lighter patch here, but that one I quite like. So I'm going to show you how I cut it now using that guide. So we've done with this bit, we've done with the Misty, and I'm going to bring in my guillotine. Okay, so I'm going to bring that piece back that we were looking at on here, and remembering that the patterned area, the longer piece was the height, the 5 1/8, so I've still got my T for the top, and I've got my width across the bottom, and remembering it's the pencil measurements, because this is my top layer, it's the pencil measurements that I want. So I want 3 strips that measure 1 5/8. Okay, so let's just pop that into the guillotine again, making sure that it's all nice and straight. And I'm going to take 1 5/8 off that edge there. So that's my left hand piece here. Then I'm going to do the same again. So I've kept it in the same orientation, and I'm going to do 1 5/8 again, just lining it up in the guillotine and splitting it into those 3 columns. Okay, now then for the first one, we're going to take it, and the top section we're going to cut 2 1/4 inches off there. So let's have a little look. We want 2 1/4 off there, and that should leave me a piece that measures 2 7/8. So I've now got this piece and this piece good to go. Remembering that my black lines were the matte layers for the silver, so these will look slightly smaller. Now I'm going to swap these 2 round. I wanted the squares in the middle, so we're going to cut the middle one into the squares, and these were 1 5/8 square. Now there is a trick with this bit, and I'll explain that. Let me just cut it into 1 5/8 squares. So I'm going to take 1 off the top, and I'm going to flip it and take 1 off the bottom. Okay, now the piece that you've got left, so this bit was the bottom here, you can see it still lines up with the pattern, and this bit was the top here. Now the bit that's left is more than 1 5/8. We've got 1 7/8, and that is because I have got 3, well, I've got 2 divisions in this one, and I've only got 1 division in here, so you've got that extra 1/8 of an inch. So what I'm actually going to do is take away those 2 1/8 of an inch to make it 1 5/8, and I'm going to cut 1 piece off the top. So we're going to bring it down to 1 3/4, and then I'm going to flip it round and bring the other piece off the bottom to make it 1 5/8. And it's not obvious what we've done here with the design. You can see that we've still got that element of the postmark. I've still got the post rings. I've still got the number stamp. Even though we've lost a little bit of the design, it's not that obvious. And then this one, I'm going to take that 2 1/4 inch this time from the bottom. All right, so I want that bottom piece at 2 1/4. And that's going to give me my panels for here and here. Okay, so that's how I've cut it all, and that's why it was important to have that you know, that sort of pattern here at the beginning, so that I knew where I was going with it. And yes, I've just changed the layout of it, but all I did was swap 1 column for the other. If you wanted to have it laid out the other way, then just cut the end one into the 3 pieces with the same measurements. And then I've cut these measurements at the top in the silver to make the matte layers, and I've just matted each piece. Okay, and then attached it to that inside layer that was 5 and 3/4 inches, and you'll end up with a piece that looks like this. So you can see this was this one here, this was the bottom one, and then I've got the 3 squares, and then I've got the tall one and the short one. All right, now I've done this ahead of time because it did take a little while to do all the cutting and the sticking and the placing. I could have paused the video, I suppose, but I have actually just got it ready. And I've actually done the coffee rings. I've just noticed in that salvage patina on this one, which I quite like. I've got them in the grey on here. So yeah, there's no right and wrong with it. You can see those little dandelion clocks, see the stenciling. I've got the numbers in there. I've got the text in there. So exactly the same procedure. And then just matting them onto those first lot of measurements and then positioning them. As far as positioning them is concerned, I went with the corners first. So I did these two, allowing that 1/8 of an inch round each side. Then I did these two with the 1/8 of an inch round each side, and then it gives you the positioning to do the top one, separating it, the bottom one, separating it, and then this one can sit in the gap, and you can get that nice even spacing round it all. So let's just pop that bit to one side now, because we don't need those pieces. And then it's just going to be simply a case of popping it together. So I have put some double-sided tape on here. If I'm working white on white, I often add that little bit of double-sided tape just to lift it. And people say, well, why did you not mat that layer, Jan? And it's about not introducing, I don't need any more colour, or I didn't want any more colour at this point in the game. I just wanted white on white. But when you actually elevate it onto some foam, and this is only 1mm foam, so it's not a lot, it just adds that little bit of shadow. So I've got my 6x6 card. I'm going to have it open on a book fold. We're going to hover over the top, and we're going to pop that one in the middle there. And what it does, you can see where it's just creating that little bit of shadow. It gives the illusion that there's something underneath it there, even though it's just the white on white. And then all we need to do then is pop the pieces together. So I've got my die cuts ready. I've just used a Smile metal die to cut this out, and I've cut it once in the silver and once in some lilac scrap that was the same blue lilac as what I'd used on the ink. And I've matted them to just give that little bit of a shadow there, and we're going to use that on here. I've also used a little flower die out of one of my sets, and I've done the same again, but I've done it the opposite way round. So I've cut it in lilac and in silver, but I put the silver on the top this time, and I've just got that little tiny drop shadow. You can see that. Let me just pop it against the white, and then you'll be able to see that shadow around the edge of it there. Popped a gem in the centre, and this is going to be part of my embellishment. I did do a little bit of embellishment here, and I'll be honest with you, I'll talk you through my way of thinking. I did this on this one, and I'd concentrated so much on getting these panels in the right place. I was actually going to wrap some silver thread round here and tie a bow. And I stuck it all down. I thought, here we go again. I am the world's worst at remembering to do that wrap. So all I did was get a tiny, tiny sliver of the silver off the scrap, and then I've used one of my little tiny bow dies here, and I've cut it out of the silver. And to be honest, I think I like it better than having that twine wrap round it. So I've just echoed that on this one. I've got that tiny little silver sliver, and then the die with a gem in the middle. And then I just wanted another part of it, and this is out of one of my sticker books. I wanted the Smile Every Day. And then I've got a little silver butterfly that we're going to offset the button with, the bow on here. So that's going to be my embellishments. Very, very simple. We do need a little bit of glue, and I'm going to use the acrylic glue. Let's just move the dies out of the way for a second. And we're going to use the acrylic glue on the back of some of them. So I'm going to position the actual sentiment piece first, and I'm just going to put little tiny dabs of my acrylic glue, which I'm getting on with very well. I am liking the Nouveau glue, I must admit. And one of the things I've noticed over and above some of the other acrylics, I'm tempting fate here, but I've never had the nozzle block. Every time I put it away and put the lid, I always wipe the nozzle, but it's never blocked. I've never had to do the pin thing to get it unblocked, so I quite like it. And as yet, I haven't found the need to decant it into my little one either. This has got a very narrow nozzle. The previous glue that I used to decant into these because it had a much wider nozzle and it came out very quickly. So yeah, really liking it. So this one, I'm going to bridge these two columns, and I want it to just be level with the bottom of this one. So I'm going to get the bottom of that L roughly level with the bottom of the panel here, and that one's going to go on there like so. And then the flower, we're going to do the same. We're just going to add some little dots. Doesn't need a massive amount of glue, as long as you've got enough for it to stick. And this is quite a quick drying glue. I like that about it as well, so you don't have to wait long for it to actually keep your things in place. And this one, I'm going to bring down this edge, but I want to just take it in slightly so that there's a bit, I don't want to line it up in the middle here because it got lost. I am actually going to bring it over that edge here, and we're going to pop this one down about there. Give it a press down, and as I say, it is quite a quick drying glue, so you don't have to hold it for very long before it's dried. My butterfly, I'm just going to pop glue in the centre. And just pop him in that corner just to offset what we've got going on that corner, like so. And then I think I popped, yeah, I've got a little bit of tape on the back of here. This was just one out of one of my sentiment sticker pads. I've got several of them from different companies, and I've popped some tape, which has been very naughty. There we go, on the back. And I did matte it, so the sticker, I've just gone around very, very lightly with the ink that was left on my brush with the lilac, and then I've matted it onto a piece of white just so that it shows up from the background. And I've gone for that smile every day. It's good advice, even when you're feeling down. If you can manage a smile, it just makes you feel better in general. So yeah, this usually gets treated to a little wipe. Put the nozzle back on. Is there something in? No, there isn't. I did wonder whether there was something in there, but it is just a nozzle. But yeah, up until now, tempting fate, I know, it's not blocked on me. So we've got the bulk of the design going on there, all right, with that lovely ink background. You could do this in any colour combination. If you're not sure about matching colours, think about your rainbow. So I've got the turquoise into the lilac, which is your blue lilac part of your rainbow. You could go yellow into green, you could go red into orange, you could go pink into orange, you could do the pink, the orange and the yellow. If you're not so sure on colour, I do have a series on my channel all about colour theory, explaining the different elements of it and why colours work nicely together. And like I said at the beginning, the only thing you need to be aware of, for example, if you were going to do something like red and purple, if they mix together, you're going to end up with a sludgy brown colour. So it's about picking a couple of colours. I picked two that were next to each other on the colour wheel. If I bring you my colour wheel back down here, I've got this handy. So yeah, I've gone for colours here. I've got the sort of the turquoises in the blue green run into the lilacs. Okay, so I've got these lighter shades here into that blue green into lilac. So like I said, if you do sort of opposite colours, if you mix sort of the greens with the reds, you're going to get a brown colour. All right, so yeah, the three primary colours make brown. So if you mix yellow, red and blue, we would get brown. Any combination of that, so the red with the purple, which is already red and purple, red and blue, it gets a bit tricky. But these are a nice colour combination to do the reds into the oranges into yellows. They're a much more warm tone, much more summery. The yellow and the green look beautiful together. The purples into the pinks look nice. So yeah, if you're not sure about it, have a look at my colour theory series. It's got its own playlist on the channel, and it does go through how to work with colour if you are a little bit more unsure about it. Okay, so the only thing, as always, it has to have, even though I've got a nice big gem in the middle of the flower, I had to add some extras. I'd already put one in the center of the bow here. You can just see that glistening here. Whoops, that's where you were. Do you know, when I got all my pieces out to do the card this morning, I couldn't find the butterfly, so I die cut another one and it was actually stuck to the back of here. It's got the gems in ready and everything. So that's going to go back in the tub for another card. Yeah, I popped a couple of gems in the centre of the butterfly, and then I've just gone for 3 around the sentiment to link everything together. So we've got that offset here from corner to corner. We've got our central part, and then this just goes from the one in the flower, linking it through the sentiment to give you that continuity across here. And then I've popped a nice simple insert in here, and we always talk about this. I sometimes do these on camera, I sometimes do them in advance, and yes, the question I get asked is, can you do this on the back of your card blank? Absolutely, no problem. If you don't want to waste another piece of cardstock, you can stamp your sentiment straight onto the back of the cardstock. I would use a stamping platform for that, just so that you get it right, and if you don't, you can overstamp. And I still use my stamping platform even on a spare piece of card, but I like the extra strength, especially when I've done a lot of work on the front. I like the extra strength of that other piece of card inside, and that's just my preference. I used to make a lot of cards that were very busy on the front, and they used to topple over because there was too much weight on the front. But adding that extra layer inside, even if this was a piece of scrap, it was the back off an old card that I didn't need any longer, and I've just cut it and popped it into there. So that's my design for today, using that lovely inky background that we chopped up into pieces. If you've got any lying around already, you could possibly make, this shape out of a background. I'm always saying, if you've not got anything else to do, have a play with the inks and make some backgrounds. And like I said at the beginning, if inking's not your thing, you can just use that grid that we had and make these pieces out of pattern paper. It would look equally stunning. Also, I'm going to leave you with that one today, and I'll be back very soon with another tutorial for you. And enjoy the rest of the day with whatever you've got planned, and I'll see you then. Bye for now.